people with real jobs.
Hello?
Self-employed people. Which do you want to be? This is Certifiably Unemployable. It's time to fire the boss and become self-employed. Maybe you need a push to get that business or side gig going that you've been dreaming about for years. And if you're an entrepreneur, you can listen to stories and get experience from people who've done it. Get ready to change your life. Broadcasting from the compound, this is Certifiably Unemployable, and this is Sean Dean.
Welcome to Certifiably Unemployable. I am your host, Sean Dean, and thank you once again for making us a part of your busy week as we're wrapping up a 2020 year, going into 2021. A lot of things happening in the world of being an entrepreneur. I mean, always there's a lot happening when you're an entrepreneur looking to start a business, or maybe you're a seasoned veteran. The first quarter of the year always tends to be the time when most businesses, they either amp up their game plan or a lot of new businesses start, particularly the businesses inside of a home-based businesses. And, you know, coming off of 2020 with the whole COVID-19 pandemic, a lot of people doing a lot more work from home. And so that is going to be more and more of, I think, the everyday feeling when it comes to being an entrepreneur. But today's guest, his name is Benjamin Preston. He's a marketer and business strategist with extensive experience in businesses of many different sizes and industries. He has an MBA from the University of North Carolina. He's actually got a very diverse career. He's launched several businesses, joined the leadership team at a startup, took a job at a billion-dollar communications company, and also worked as a Native American economic development firm. Benjamin now consults with small businesses, helping them develop their strategies, scale their operations across various industries. He was born in Omaha, Nebraska. He currently lives in Arlington, Virginia. Ben, welcome to Certifiably Unemployable.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. Thank you for being a part of our show. So one of the things that Ben focuses on, folks, just so you fully understand, is that he helps entrepreneurs, I guess, kind of dig inside of their business and understand what their strengths are, help them grow their business, not just as a startup, but as a long-term career. So he's going to pull from your strengths and everything else. But before we really understand more of what Ben does, we're going to understand that we overthink a lot of things as Americans. And as entrepreneurs, we typically are the type of people, we just dive in. We don't think through the process. So, and a lot of times people, before they go through that process or before they even dive in, right away they think, man, this is going to be hard. And that's why today we're letting you know that starting a business doesn't have to be hard. Starting a business, don't overthink it, right? So Ben, let's go ahead and find out a little bit more about Benjamin Preston. Tell us about you, your background, what got you started, and how you ended up being certifiably unemployable.
Yeah. So I think like most people, I went through undergrad. I started a lot of businesses, which at the time I wouldn't have called myself an entrepreneur. I was just like doing stuff, my side hustle type of thing.
Right.
And I went to college, got my degree, started working for somebody else, which I feel like is kind of like the norm, the traditional career path for a lot of people is they start working. So for me, I got my first job in New York City, which was super awesome. After a while, I was like not feeling it. So I hopped around a couple different times. During that time, I started kind of experimenting more with like market. I mean, I am a marketer and I am a business strategist, but that was like my core function. What I was getting paid to do was being more of a marketer and being more of a business strategist. And what I learned was there was a lot of stuff that I was doing that I kind of didn't care for. So it was like, when you're working for somebody else and they're like, here's 100% of the stuff you have to do. And you're like, but I really only want to do this 50%. I kind of don't care about everything else. So that 50% was stuff that I naturally gravitated toward. Started finding a lot of people just in my network in general that were interested in learning more about that. So I was working with their businesses, helping them out. I was just kind of doing it, not getting paid, just more as like a friend being like, hey, here's how you do stuff. And then before you knew it, I had a business. So that was kind of my beginning of being an entrepreneur. But I feel like there was so much that I learned working for somebody else. But then at some point I was ready to do it on my own and actually be my own boss. But yeah, I think the topic that's really interesting that I'm looking forward to diving more into is this idea of you don't have to overthink a business. I think for my journey as an entrepreneur has always been something where I wouldn't label myself as an entrepreneur. I kind of was like being more of a friend or viewing it more as something that wasn't my job. It was kind of just something that I did for fun, which I think is, at least in my opinion, like people are like, oh, I have to go to work, or I'll have clients or people where they're like, I have to go to work, and it's more of like a drudge. And I'm like, I get to go to work. Like, how cool is it that I get to have conversations like this as part of my job, where I get to be like networking with people and working on their businesses and helping them grow? To me, that's super exciting. So I feel like a lot of people go into business or go into entrepreneurship thinking, here's all the 30 different things that I have to do, versus saying, here are the 5 things that I absolutely get to do, and then everything else kind of figures itself out. So I'm really excited to talk about that.
Yeah, me too. A lot of people think when they get started in business that they have to have every detail, every part of the plan completely structured out. And that's not always the case. And, one of the things that you have to focus on first is, are you excited about it? Are you passionate about it? You want to have fun. If you're not going to have fun and you're going to have all the responsibilities as a business owner, then you're doing it all wrong. You're doing it for the wrong reasons too, because you might as well go work for somebody else if you're not going to have fun with your own business. So 100%. So I want to understand a little bit more. You opened up several businesses for fun before you really understood what was going on in the space of entrepreneurship. I mean, you saw it as a viable alternative option for you. But what kind of businesses did you open up for fun initially?
Yeah. So my very first company, so my view on, I always thought, and the reason I never labeled it as entrepreneurship was I always thought that being an entrepreneur meant you had to like burn all the boats, burn all the bridges, and start a thing all by yourself and just kind of like make it happen as force of will type of thing.
Yeah, like you're there, you're going to conquer the world, and it's you versus the world, right?
Yes. Yeah, and it was like you had to like start fresh. Like there was you couldn't make it a gradual transition. And I'm kind of like a risk adverse person in that way, where I'm like, I didn't want to not have an income while doing my business. So but yeah, so for me, my very first business was a PR firm called Preston PR, which I thought it was clever at the time. I had business cards and it was like the first 2 letters of my last name. So it was kind of ridiculous. But basically I went to journalism school. That was my undergrad degree. And I did a lot of I had just learned how to use Photoshop and Illustrator and all these other things. So I felt like I was really cutting edge design, which I look back at some of the stuff, the work that I did, and I was like, ooh, this is cringeworthy. It was so bad. But I did a lot of like graphics, press releases, communication type work for small businesses, nonprofits. And I did most of that for free. Not that they wouldn't have paid me if I would have asked. It just never occurred to me to have them charge me, because a lot of people came up to me and they're like, hey, I saw that what you did for this company. Can you do that for us too? And I'm like, sure. So, and it was just like light promotion work kind of thing. That was my first business. My second legitimate business was a nonprofit that me and my sister actually started called the Hereditary Cancer Foundation. And that is a nonprofit we based out of Omaha. So this is kind of a side story, but our mom passed away in 2005 from breast cancer. And at the time, genetic testing for kind of viewing in genetics and cancer wasn't really something that happened. It was kind of like, oh yeah, cancer's a thing. It's from all these environmental conditions, blah, blah, blah. But like 10% of cancers are connected with some sort of hereditary thing. So like my mom had it, my great grandma had it, like all these different people are having cancer in our family. So my sister and I are looking at this being like, there's especially in the Midwest, because I'm from Nebraska, a lot of those families have hereditary cancer as part of, the cause of cancer. Anyway, long story short, we were like, there's a huge gap in patient awareness and kind of testing, because testing at the time was like, I don't know, I think it was close to like $6,000 to get a test. And if you are making $40,000 a year, are you going to spend $6,000 on fixing the car? Or are you going to spend it on figuring out your healthcare risks? So a lot of what our work was finding donors, finding investors, finding people to give us money so that we could kind of support these patients and advocates and doctors and things like that. So that was my second business, which is still running. I think we started that in 2014, 2013, somewhere in that range. And then my most recent business, Benjamin Preston LLC, I have 2, that's my most recent business. I published a book in June of 2020 where I was kind of a young professional development book. So I have two components of my business right now. One of them is more of a career coaching, life coaching for individuals, and then business coaching and business strategy and marketing work for businesses. So that's my business model right now.
Okay. The first thing I thought about when you started your PR, what was it called?
Preston PR. Yeah.
Yeah. You could have had so many things to do with that. That just would have been fun. It was your first business.
Yeah.
You could have had somebody intentionally call you up, paging Mr. Preston. It's like one of those things where, you just have fun with it. But I love the fact that you and your sister started the nonprofit organization, which is just 100% an example of something that you take that 100% comes from a passion, because naturally it was affecting your family. And so you were able to take that. So were you able to grow that non-for-profit into something else, or what is it anything today? What did it become?
Yeah, it's still going. It's still going strong. I'm not as actively involved in the day-to-day as I was in 2014 when we started it. A lot of what is my role is right now is coming up with the marketing planning, and then we have a team of people that actually will execute and stuff. So I think our revenue right now, I think this past year, 2020 has been a little weird, but it probably will be close to 150, 200,000. And a lot of the work that we do is patient advocate. So it helps us because the money that we bring in goes to other people. We don't I don't get any money from it. My sister doesn't get any money from it. It's fully like a nonprofit where all the money that comes in, it goes out somewhere, and then we'll pay, we'll use some of it for overheads and things like that. But most of the people that we work with are volunteers too. So yeah, that one was kind of a total, I guess all my businesses are things that I didn't think I'm starting a business. It was just there's a need in the world and I have the skill set to actually make something happen there, which I think is always really cool. And ironically, most of my businesses have started, or at least the concepts all started with the new year. So this is kind of a good time for this conversation. But yeah, we started that business in February. I remember it because my sister came out to me and was like, do you ever feel like you just don't, there's a missing gap here? And I was like, yeah, actually there is. And then we're just it was kind of I don't know if you've gotten into those brainstorms where you go back and forth, where it's we could do this and we could do this and we could do this. And then the next thing you know, there's a business. So that part was really exciting for me.
Anytime you can fill a void or you find a solution in a marketplace or even just something, there's a missing link somewhere, you've got a niche, you've got possibly an effective business. And even the topic of non-for-profit, people think all the time, well, why would I start a non-for-profit? Because I want to start a business to make money. Well, they don't understand that within the non-for-profit, there are allocations for salaries, because naturally people are running and everything else. And there's some very, very, very successful non-for-profit organizations out there. And that's something actually we are going to have more discussion on, because I know I've got a friend of mine right now. She's in the process of putting together a non-for-profit in the theater space, and it's a great project, and it is one of those things to where once you get the parts put together, because with a non-for-profit you have to completely have the structure, you've got to have it put together properly. But once that's put together, then it can be an easily well-oiled machine. So that's fantastic that your foundation, the non-for-profit group, is still doing very well. So let's talk about shifting your career from going into working into being an entrepreneur. How was that for you? And all along you're having fun doing it. Talk about that.
Yeah. So I, before I started working for myself, I was working for a Native American economic development company, which their primary goal was building up economies on different reservations across the US. So I had a total diverse sort of outlook on different work and things that I could do. At one point during that, I felt like there was I think the thing that people always talk about is I need to make an impact in the world. And literally what I was doing day to day was the definition of making an impact. These very low impoverished reservations, we were coming in, helping them build up their businesses, helping them build up their economies. That's super fulfilling. At some point I kind of had a thing where I'm I feel like I can make a bigger impact doing my own thing. But at that point, I didn't really have the mindset or the confidence to just quit my job and start my own business. Like what we were talking about before, it wasn't something where I just looked at it and was yeah, I'm going to burn all the bridges and I'm going to tell my boss to F off and I'm going to do, like I just wasn't in that space. And so what I did was I was like, you know what, I feel like I can really start having these types of conversations or doing these types of things where I was like, I'm going to write a book. Because I don't know if a lot of people have that thought, but for me, it just like overwhelmed me where I was like, you know what, I'm going to write a book and I'm going to start talking about the things that are passionate to me, about business, about careers, about all this type of stuff. And that's kind of how it started. And then over the period of about 2 years, I really wasn't even working on my own for like 2 years. Because I started writing the book in January 2019 or something. Like it was a while ago. And yeah, so my mindset at that point was, I'm just going to do this because it seems like something that's interesting, blah, 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 blah. So, but then at one point I was like, you know what, I'm going to start working on my own. I'm going to have my own business. I'm going to do my own thing. And then at that point I was like, all right, I'm ready to run this business. I'm ready to make it profitable. And even within that window, by the time I started to run my own business, I didn't put in my 2 weeks notice. I was still gradually, making money from my income from this other person while still doing my own, while doing work, while working for someone else, but then investing a ton of time instead of watching. And the pandemic was super great for this, by the way, like being able to work from home and be like, you know what, I can take these phone calls while I'm working my full-time job and it's not weird and I can do all this stuff. So it was kind of like balancing. So like instead of watching Netflix at night, I was like working on a course, or instead of like, I don't know, playing video games, I was doing something else. So it was kind of like I was doing 2 full-time jobs at once. And then at some point I was like, you know what, I'm going to just make my business my own thing. I have enough traction. I have enough. And for me, the risk adversity in that was I didn't want to not have an income. I didn't want to have no money while I was trying to build up my business. Cause to me, that didn't seem like something that was exciting or fun to do. So I was just like, I'm going to continue working. I'm not going to look at my career in this company as a growth potential. I'm going to say my growth is outside of the company doing my own thing, work toward building my own business. And then that's kind of, it was less pressure for me, which I felt like is helpful, because if you have a ton of pressure on you, that's when you start making a ton of mistakes. That's when you start hustling. That's when you start freaking out, because you have like, I need to make $5,000 this month and I don't know how I'm going to pay rent. And I don't know how to do all this stuff. I'm like, I didn't have that stress because I kind of was working it as 2 jobs at once, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And as a listener listening to this episode, you have to identify where you're at in level of risk. I'm a little different than Ben when it comes to risk, because I get excited about something. I want to dive in full force. And then I just have 100% complete faith on myself. Not saying that if you don't take that risk, you don't have faith in yourself, but that's where it's so important for you to understand in allocating the time. I mean, I reference the time clock a lot when it comes to being an entrepreneur, and people always say they don't have enough time. And if you really break it down, there's 168 hours in a week, right? And so if you took 40 of those, let's say you're working a full-time job, right? So you take 40 hours away. How many you have from 168? You got 128, right? Then let's say you said, well, I have to sleep 8 hours a night, which a lot of entrepreneurs I know barely get 8 hours of sleep, just especially when they're hustling. But let's say you did. So that's 56 hours of sleep, 7 days a week, 8 hours a day. Then you put 42 hours a week for eating, commuting, family time, things like that. You still are left with 30 hours out of the week to work your business. And like you said, you took that Netflix time and you shifted it and you said, you know what, I'm gonna do something else that's gonna help me build my business. And the reason why I bring that up is I don't want people to always think that they have to just completely submerge themselves and dive in and be scared and take that, what they consider a tremendous risk. If you're a bachelor, you're single, maybe you don't have any kids, maybe, you can then allocate your risk a little differently. But when you go to start your business, you have to be able to separate what you can do and what is viable to you. But with that being said, you don't want to use any of that as an excuse not to start your business. And so I'm glad to hear you took the approach you did, because it's a different approach than what I would have taken, just because that's my personality. Yeah. But that's awesome. I love that. So it allowed you to enjoy what you were doing. It allowed you to absorb what your process was, and it sounded like it really worked for you. So that's great advice.
Yeah, it was interesting too, because I always hear that. I hear that a lot with people that businesses that I work with, where they're like, I don't have enough time. And I'm just like, okay, from my perspective, I was working a full-time job and I got my MBA at the same time. That I did that at the same time. I was
Right.
working full-time and wrote my book at the same time. I was working and doing, like, you can come up with a million and one excuses for why you don't have enough time for something, but like, really, and in my opinion, if you enjoy what you're doing, like for me, like I sometimes have hard time sleeping at night because I am so jazzed thinking about, I get to do that. Like last night I was thinking, I was like, I got to have this interview tomorrow. I'm like excited for things like that to happen. And like a lot of work gets done in those times of excitement and just kind of like not thinking about it. And all of a sudden it comes to you where you're like, oh, I can do this and this and this. When a lot of people, I feel like when you're working on things that you like, or you're working on things that are exciting to you, you might be working 10 hours, but you might get 30 hours of work done. And that's what I found. Like the stuff, like I'm super excited about strategy and kind of how things connect and how pieces are put together. And what I found is some people, if that's not their strength, they might spend 30 hours working on something like that, where I could work on it for 5 hours and have it done, because that's just the stuff that I like doing and I understand how it works. Reversely, I hate working on anything finance or accounting related, I avoid it. So it takes me longer to do those things. But for the most part, like if you say, I mean, even if you have those 30 hours, you're coming at them with like this supercharged attitude of, I can do it. I'm already working on it. I'm super good at it. I have all this like momentum behind me. And so you might work for 30 hours and get 60 hours of work done. I know that the math doesn't add up, but it's like the more that you enjoy it, the more that time doesn't seem like work, it seems like fun. And so that's the thing where it's like, instead of looking at video games and saying, well, I could be having fun playing video games, which I'm not a huge video gamer, but just as an example, if you're saying I love video games, but you also like this other thing that you could be doing too. The only difference is this other thing that you could be doing could be making you money and moving you forward and all this other stuff. And so it's kind of just like viewing it as a substitute, instead of saying like, oh, I have to work. It's like, I get to do this thing. And if you're not at that point where you're like excited to do that, then you kind of need to evaluate what your business idea is. And if you're really willing to invest all this time to work on it.
Right. So you look at what you had said about preparing for our meetup today with the podcast, yeah. Right? Being on Certifiably Unemployable. You were overthinking it. You were being a human being, you were overthinking it. And what does that do? That takes the fun away. When all along, all we're doing is chatting about stuff that you are very comfortable with because it's your life. You've lived it. And so that's where people need to understand that overthinking it a lot of times, over preparing a lot of times is going to make it worse. It's even when I prepare for the podcast, I like to get my notes from my guests ahead of time. I like to understand more about my guests, but I can read through it over and over and over again, but I also want it to have a level of energy that's going to allow it to be exciting. It's going to allow it to be fresh. And we have to remember, we're human beings. It's okay to make mistakes, and it's okay to stumble over those things. One thing I wanted to ask you, because you were talking about 30 hours, you're talking about allocating your time. What specifically does Ben do to keep you on track as far as on course, keeping organized? Because that's a common issue when you're an entrepreneur and starting your own business.
Yeah. So I may not be like a typical person in that respect. What I like to do is I have a list of things, whether it's physical or mental. Normally it's physical because otherwise I can't keep track. I have kind of a list of things that I need to do and work on in, let's just say, a week. So this week, I'm going to be continuing to work on my online course that I'm launching. I'm working on book promotions. I'm working on all this stuff. But instead of going from top down, I normally just say, what am I most excited to work on right now? And sometimes it's nothing, in which case I'll go take a walk. I don't want to sit down and force myself to do stuff, because what I've learned is when I do that personally, I make a lot of mistakes, or it's not as good, or it just kind of doesn't feel, the end product I'm not satisfied with, so I end up redoing it anyway. And so what I do is I go through the list and say, okay, what am I most excited to work on? And I usually find something, because it's all my business. And so I'll say, you know what, I'm going to work on my course for 30 minutes. I'm going to do this. And a lot of times, I don't know if you're like this, but when I work on something, I go down the rabbit hole where I like lose track of time. I work on it for 5 hours. I don't take breaks for lunch. And then I come back up and I'm like, oh, well, it's done. and it's good. So that I kind of go through that system of saying what's most exciting to work on. And if I don't have anything, I normally will take a break. I might go meditate. I might go on a walk. I might do something like that. Very rarely I have found I have a list where I don't want to do anything on it, which has happened. But like for the most part, a lot of the stuff that I do is the next logical step from where I am. Right. And so it's like, if I don't know, if I worked on, let's say, book promotions, we might have done all these different book promotion tactics and techniques. And then my next logical step is, okay, I'm just going to back off and let those ad campaigns run and work on this other thing while I'm there. And like, that's a conscious decision that I make, because you can overwork things. You can sit down and like, you could spend days on Google ads being like, I got one click and they didn't convert. I got this thing and this didn't happen and this didn't happen. Like, that's totally a thing. So I like book that into my time and be like, I'm consciously going to ignore this or focus on something else. But yeah, normally my to-do list is I kind of go based on what's most exciting, and then I schedule my day around that. But my days are like very sporadic, and they're organized in that I know what I would like to get accomplished that day, but I don't hold my feet to the fire if I get one thing done on Monday and 10 things done on Friday. Like, as long as everything is kind of getting done and I have confidence that I can get that done.
Well, that's a good point. A lot of times people need to understand that you don't have to start at 8 o'clock and go bore until 4 or 5 in the afternoon. You know, there's nothing wrong with maybe doing an 8 to 12, get some stuff done, go out on a bike ride, do some different things, ride the motorcycle, go on the boat, do what you got to do to, air out, and then come back and work for a few more hours. I mean, that's the power of being self-employed. That's certifiably unemployable, because no one's telling you what to do. I know for me, if it's not on my calendar, it doesn't happen, because my brain will forget. And that's how my brain processes things, because I have to stay on course, because we do have multiple things happening. We have multiple businesses going on. And when you're an entrepreneur, you want to stay on top of all of that. So you have to remain 100% on course. So thanks for that advice. So let's talk about what you do now, what you do for entrepreneurs. I know you mentioned something about an online course. You mentioned something about a book. Do you have anything right now that you can offer our listeners?
Yes. So I have a book called Harness Your Butterflies, The Young Professional's Metamorphosis to an Exciting Career. And so that was like I said, my business is broken up into two parts. One of them is like the career coaching aspect. And then the other part of it is like the business strategy and consulting part of it. The business strategy and consulting piece of it, a lot of it is marketing support, business strategy support. And I usually take those clients either like, if they message me or whatever, but a lot of like my direct to consumer stuff is my book, which is out. And then my online course, which I'm hoping to launch in the next probably like month. And that's a deeper dive into the content of the book. So I have like that career coaching package kind of stuff that's available for people. And then if they're interested in business and marketing support, I can do that.
Okay.
I don't have any packages up front.
So is there a call to action for the listeners right now for them to reach out to you? Is there anything you can offer them? What would you say would be a call to action for them right now?
Yes. I would say if you're interested in learning more about how to develop a career that's exciting, like a lot of my approach and the stuff that I have found is your career is only as exciting as you make it, as you create it to be. And so if you're interested in learning how to make your career more exciting, whether it is working for someone else or specifically working on creating your own business, because there's a lot of work that comes into and a lot of anxiety and uncertainty that comes with running your own business, you can still make that an exciting career. And if you're interested in learning more about that, message me or email me, benjamin@benjaminpreston.com. Add me on LinkedIn. I'd be more than happy to chat with you. And honestly, and I probably this might date not well, but if you just want like a 15-minute conversation, email me. I'm totally accessible. Or if you want the book, obviously go buy the book, message me and say, I really love this part. Would you have 15 minutes to chat? And I will be more than happy to chat with you.
Well, that's the biggest thing. A lot of times when you're working with somebody, you need to have that initial 15-minute chat to see if it's even going to work. Yeah. Because the last thing you want to do is set time aside, say we're going to work together when you might not even click. It might not be a good relationship. So I'm glad you offered that. Thank you for that. I will also put the link to your book inside the comments of the podcast. Don't forget to leave your comments. Don't forget to let us know what your thought process is while you're listening to this episode. But the biggest thing, the biggest takeaway from today's episode is being an entrepreneur, starting your own business. Don't overthink it. Have fun. Starting a business, don't overthink it. Being an entrepreneur is designed to be rewarding. It's designed to position yourself for greatness, for things wonderful in your life and your family, so on and so forth. So if you need to reach out to Ben and you want to connect, if you want me to connect the two of you, that's fine. I could do that as well. So Ben, I look forward to maybe having you on in future episodes. We appreciate it. Is there any last minute words you want to mention before we wrap it up today?
I just want to say thank you for having me. I get so jazzed. I don't know if you can tell. I love having these types of conversations, especially because I know that these types of conversations benefit me. So I hope that someone out there is finding these super helpful. I just want to say thank you for having me on.
Oh, my pleasure. Because I wish I had stuff like this when I was first getting started. I had to seek out different mentors and which I'm grateful for because they taught me so many things. However, I appreciate the knowledge because it's super helpful. So don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, let us know what your thoughts are so we can design our future episodes to fit your needs. Until next time.
You've been listening to Certifiably Unemployable. Ready to fire the boss yet? You're on your way. Sean has been self-employed for over 20 years. So if that's something that you want to do, something you've been dreaming about for years, Sean has all the knowledge, good, bad, and indifferent. We hope you've gotten some useful and practical information from this show. And we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hook up with us on Facebook and Instagram at Certifiably Unemployable. Find us on YouTube and at www.certifiablyunemployable.us.net.org and .info. Till next time, this is Certifiably Unemployable, signing off.